air conditioning. If you eliminate that system, you're eliminating the ventilation and the heating for that space. So you would have to reinstall some kind of a system for, you know, whatever your final use would be.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Could you repeat what that cost is?
Yeah,
Brian?
please.
We'll have to get back to you with that. Didn't know that was a question for tonight.
Oh, okay. And then I guess let's discuss options then. I guess an option is to replace it in kind with raising the curb boxes. Or the second option I'm thinking is, again, trying to put it in the building. So I guess there's probably at least two options there to explore.
Right now, from a development standpoint, replacing that would be your least expensive option to go ahead and do. Otherwise, you're getting back into redesign and additional costs and everything else for that. It's a standard rooftop unit with duct drops that, again, if you reconfigure and put up walls and move people around, you just move your flexible duct in your diffusers and balance it based on the final setup that you end up with in that location.
Okay, Barb, you have a question?
In the requested ads, what are the benefits and even any cons to the two ads that you presented to us tonight?
Sure thing. Be more than happy to talk with you about that. As requested at the last board meeting for Horace Mann, when we developed this phase of the ESCO project, we stayed cognizant of the, I'll say, available capital the district expressed an interest in putting towards improvements within your buildings. We could have developed a $10 million, probably $12 million project with all kinds of additional things that we could make recommendations that be done. The request was made at Horace Mann based on age of the equipment over there and still having pneumatic controls, which means operated by air, that they be replaced. So we provide that option to you. Those systems are old and past useful life, as with much of what we've made recommendations in today or in the IGA. So you have old equipment that you will be replacing if you're keeping the building long-term, and it's investment in that building and student comfort, ventilation, and systems that all talk to your central building automation system for better control. More comfortable learning environment, more safe with improved ventilation and better control and savings. It's just old stuff needs replaced with new.
At the Horace Mann, would that cover all then of the controls for ventilation, or are there some still not being done?
Everything we counted in that building, and we think we got everything. So yeah, we got you covered there. We did part of it in the first phase, where we did a couple of air handlers, I think 4 unit vents. I read that earlier this morning in preparation for the meeting. But the meat and potatoes of the building's air delivery system was not replaced at that time. That would bring it on par with your other buildings.
Right, and then the East Pike VRF, you kind of briefly mentioned about it being a little bit more energy efficient. Is that pretty much the benefit of doing the system that way versus the other way?
I'll give you 2 benefits. It is more efficient than the initial recommendation. The additional savings that you would get annually, we've calculated at just over $2,600 a year. And you can see the cost adder to accomplish that. And it would provide, if I get it wrong, Michael, please jump in, a better, more accurate control for spaces than a VAV. But I will also say a properly balanced VAV system will provide good comfort as well.
In the future, if we ever plan to put central air in all of our elementary buildings, does doing these improvements help with that, or is that a separate system?
How best to answer that? You could probably pay a little extra and order unit ventilators with both heating and cooling coils and be prepared for adding a chilled water system down the line. Or, and again, depends on the manufacturer that will be picked or purchased or talked with you about. Could you get a unit ventilator that had a slide out chassis that you could put a chassis in with a cooling coil at a later date? That's a good question. We'd take direction from you. I have delivered unit ventilators with cooling coils for future use. And clients, if they've added a chilled water line, then could connect up to their unit ventilators and have their equipment in place. They just made a little investment up front to have it there for future use. So excellent question. Could be accomplished.
If say we were to do that at I'm just picking Ben Franklin School, what's the cost of a unit ventilator?
I have to see what we installed at Ben Franklin School and what will be done there. I believe we replaced all the units there when we did our work in 2012, but I'd have to double check and get back to you. I don't have that at my fingertips.
All right, I'm just kind of curious to what the cost difference would be of preparing for the future versus just going for the heating option. And then my other question I had was I couldn't remember from our last conversation how many our agreement with you is for X amount of years. By doing this project, how many years does it extend that? I couldn't quite remember.
Sure. Yeah, we are. We currently have a contract with you guys for 15 years, which was the legislation, where we provide you a guarantee of savings every year for those 15 years. And that was on page 13 of the investment grade audit. And the legislation's changed, which allows you to go out to 20 years. So we talked about being able to increase savings on phase one and guarantee that, as well as extend that savings on phase one out to 20 years as a benefit to you.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Mr. Kerr, I'll defer to you, sir, but would you like to stick to the topic of the roof? That way the board can have time to look at the report and have any other questions for next week's Buildings and Grounds Committee, even though they're good questions and important discussion. I think we're at a point where if I'm hearing everyone's input right now is we don't have an option. We're not going with any option for the East Pike Group. We want Constellation to go back, report back to us on that third option, and we can possibly discuss that next week. Is that a clear summary of where we're at, sir?
We have a lot of options and we have a lot
Yeah, I can't hear.
we have a lot of options and we have a lot of discussion. The bottom line here is multi-zillion dollars. I think we have to prioritize what we're going to do, and I think we can do that in your next meeting. I think we have enough data to, we don't know exactly, but
We don't. He's gonna look at just the elementary roof, see if we can get the 25-year warranty, and then what the cost is to just raise that unit or replace that unit.
and that's going to be a relatively nominal number. The units over the administration wing will fall apart when we raise them. And so I'm looking at this, that budget's 1.7 million. Okay.
Let's just stick to the elementary. That's what,
Yeah,
Mike,
yeah, I'm-
I agree. Let's try to get back
Okay.
on track. Just let's
Yeah.
focus on that elementary roof. Get us that information and then we can, come back next week and hopefully come up with a decision and to move forward to the next board meeting. I think Cinda has raised her hand.
Yes, I do have a question. So with all of these options floating around, if we chose to do the main portion of the East Pike roof and replace that one unit that is over the old administration, the old principal's office, and we chose to do the central administration wing with the VRF, what's the bottom line on that? What's the total?
Mr.
Well-
Town, I'd have to defer to you, sir.
Sure. And if I understood, if we're talking about doing the East Pike roof and doing the HVAC systems with VRF, you're looking at, and I'm going to do a little math here on a pad of paper, so bear with me. I've got the East Pike HVAC at 1037. I have the East Pike roof at 788. And then I have an adder at the bottom to go VRF of 426. So 1521, 210, 1315, 82, looks like just over 2.2 million. Is that correct? Did someone double check me?
But Cinda, that does all
Yeah.
the controls in the whole East Pike building.
No, if you wanted to add controls, that would be adding the East Pike BMS to that at 678.
Oh, I thought you added that in. Oh, I see.
Oh,
Those
And
numbers
that,
are good.
so add another 678.
and that would be 2.9.
Whoa, be still my heart. I mean, we were talking about an $800,000 number, Terry and Mike, and it just seems to me that, you know, we have limited dollars and getting it all done in a timely fashion. Brian, how soon do you think you can be back to us on the questions we have? By next
Well,
week?
we'll have answers for you next week. I'll voice a little concern from my end that our hope was to develop a guaranteed energy savings project that helped push additional savings for you that you could use moving forward, and a roof as part of a multifaceted project, if you will. I've got a construction manager across all ECMs. As you drop down to, let's say, just a roof, you may be best just to go with your state contract roofer and just do a roof. But we'll get back to you with this, but there has to be some a semblance of scale, I think, for us to provide some of the benefits that we provide with that guarantee to you. We'll work with you as best we can on that. One of the things I know the superintendent brought up earlier, if you don't add insulation, we can't do it just based on the law. Neither can you as an add to the contract. So he was correct in that, based on the 15% rule. But there are a number of what I'll call, or as the district termed as district priorities, year 1 and 2 priorities, and 2 through 5 year priorities that we accomplish based on direction. And we hope that that's still up for consideration at next meeting as well.
And Mr. Town, just to clarify from my perspective, can you explain to all the committee members what the $2.1 million gets us? If I understand in layman terms, it gets us the roof with insulation, it gets us HVAC. We just wouldn't have newer controls. That's probably a poor explanation on my part, but is that a correct explanation on my part?
I'm sorry, I looked at my numbers and glanced down. I think I had, based on the questionnaire earlier, I can't scroll up, but I had the East Pike HVAC, and I added in the roof as presented in the IGA at 788. And then we added in the adder of converting the base proposal to be variable refrigerant flow for the admin. And that was at 2,251,000 rough numbers from jotting it on a pad today, 2.2 million. Then the question was raised about if we wanted to replace, again, 20-plus-year-old direct digital controls from Barber Coleman Company, not supported, very hard to operate on probably a 486 PC for that building that are past useful life and not supported. That's some of the other work that was discussed as well this evening. And what generates your bulk of savings and rebates is your lighting at the top there. And again, we can get back to the Horace Mann discussion at a later date on, I think, what keeps Mr. Trout up at night, at least till he retires, on the switchgear feeders and panels over there.
keeps us all up at night.
There you go.
Okay.
It's not going away.
Yeah, we need to move on.
Yeah. Some of this has been brought up by a number of professionals too, and I understand. You guys are wrestling with it. I fully get it.
All right, well, thanks. I think we will have enough information at next week's meeting then to, because I believe that there's consensus to increase the insulation thickness and obtain that value from that. So, all right, what's next?
Thank you, Mr. Kerr. Next on our list is the artificial turf replacement. At last week's academic committee meeting, the committee discussed the academic reasons and need for the artificial turf to be replaced. At that point, the academic committee issued their support behind the replacement. We did talk cost, but we thought it was, in the sake of transparency and over communicating, to bring it up here tonight again to revisit that conversation to see if the buildings and grounds and audit and finance also support that need. Again, we discussed the academic benefits. Now we would like to talk as far as a timetable for completing the project and as well as cost. The one thing I did include is a mock-up of what the field would look like. However, that's not the goal tonight to approve. That would be through next week's committee meeting. Tonight is about really, do we feel comfortable and support the recommendation that the audit and finance or the academic committee meeting made for the needed replacement? The costs are there. We explained how we would pay for this because we know that's important too, but this is our position again. It was last week, will be this week. This is a unique opportunity with the ESSERS funding coming down the road to be able to take care of a need that has, we've shown to be good custodians of over the last, decade or more of taking care of this field. And we think it's timely. We think it's needed. And we'd like the board to ratify this on April 26th. So again, we would have further conversations between your next week's committee as far as the design and what that looks like. But tonight's goal is really say, do we support the academic committee's recommendation for replacement? Are we okay with the cost? And address any other questions. Before I turn over to committee, Mr. Kerr, Mr. Lazanik, do you have anything that you would like to add from your perspective as athletic director that we need to be aware of?
We can't hear him.
He's coming to a microphone right now, Ms. Cinda. For everyone who wasn't able to hear him, he just said he's re-echoing and reiterating the comments that I made. But
Yeah, Mr. Vikovich, I would just like to say that outside of what was discussed last week, I have really nothing to add other than, over the years, the field has been maintained very well. It's time. It's just time. And I'm here just to answer any questions that anyone may have.
Thank you, Mr. Lazanik. Mr. Trout, are you on the call? Is there anything that you'd like to explain? Because I asked you about a time frame in order for completion if this were to get done. Are you on the call? Is there any further clarification that you or Cheney could add to this part of the conversation?
No, it's just important, as you have indicated in your message, that if it is approved early enough, we can get it put in on a very timely matter. If we do wait too long, that could take us maybe into August.
And prices could go up.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Trout. So, Mr. Kerr, I'll defer to you at this point. I think there's a question we can call on. I think that's Ms. Cinda. Ms. Cinda, please go ahead.
Yes. So my 2 cents for what it's worth. I've been a person who's been very hesitant for a long time about the turf, but it's time. We have the money. We need to just do it and move on. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Cinda. I think Walter.
Yeah, my question is to Greg. I believe I was on the board when we first installed that turf, and the proposal we got was from Shaw Sports Turf. I don't remember, is this the same brand, same manufacturer of the turf that's on there now, or is it a different brand, different manufacturer?
For that answer, I'd like to defer to Mr. Trout.
It is the same company. There is a new generation, and that's what we've got the quote for. Just like everything else over time, they look to improve their products, and that's what they have done. And I heard somebody mention briefly that if we do wait, they already have told me that there definitely is an increase because of plastics going up. So that was the other consideration. If we would wait, there would also be another increased percentage.
Yeah, that was me, Greg. This is Julia. Yeah, I do think, I think that we can afford it at the 364.8, but as an estimate, but I don't think that we can chance a big increase. I mean, the economy will go through a pretty nice boom, and that's going to mean price. So I'm concerned. I think we need to get it done.
Greg, just as a kind of follow-up question, if this is the quote new and improved version, what is new and improved about it versus the generation that's currently down on the field now?
It has to do with the way they manufacture their fibers. They've developed new ways for bonding purposes and twist and that type of thing.
Are they expecting any greater life expectancy because of these new manufacturing process, or is this just simply a way to cut their manufacturing costs?
Probably the warranty would not be any longer. I do know that, but as far as overall performance on it, they claim that the performance is a little bit better. As far as whether it's less expensive, that I can't tell you. That's something they really didn't share with me.
Thank you.
Tom, go ahead.
Greg Lazanik. At the end zones, the chain link fence is relatively close to that end line. And probably not a major problem in football. In soccer, it's right at the end of where they play. Has there been any problems with that tightness? And should we consider moving that fence another 5 yards back or something like that?
I personally have not been made aware of any issues along that. I can see how it could be an issue. I have not, though, had that issue raised to me. One thing about the chain link fence I would just like to mention is that at the scoreboard end of the field, where it seems like during football games, well, everything, soccer, everything, that's the main entrance. And there's more fans, more spectators at that end zone leaning on that padding, and that padding is terrible at that end zone. Yes, it is all ripped, and the internal foam is showing it on that end zone.
And that's something that we should also upgrade. But my main question to you and Greg Trout both then is, if there's other things we need to do to make it safer and
Okay.
usable, then this is the time to add
Okay.
more space if we have to do that. Okay?
Mr. Myers raised his hand, Tom, so maybe he had a comment. Mr. Myers?
Yeah, let me address the fence issue. I don't necessarily think that from a soccer standpoint, that it's a safety concern on the end zones. My bigger concern is actually on the sidelines, because the soccer field is wider than a football field, where we have to put our benches. There is probably from the front of the bench to the edge of the field 2, maybe 3 feet. So there is a danger issue there. That's where I see the bigger concern. I know with football, you don't have, I know you got a lot more people with football, but I think there's more space because of where the football sideline is. But again, maybe not. But with the soccer benches being there, that's always been a concern of mine, how close that is to the sideline.
And Todd, can I follow up with you? We've had conversations in the past when you go to the playoffs, and again, I'm going from memory here, but when you go to the playoffs, when the fields are wider, the field you play on is a little bit wider, is it not? Like we use a smaller boundaries because of those fences.
Honestly, it depends on the field. Quite honestly, a soccer field could be anywhere from 55 to 75 wide, and I think ours is roughly around the 65 range. So ours is not considered small, but it's also not considered on the bigger side. Yeah, for example, when we played down at Bell Vernon, theirs is very, very big. So from a playoff standpoint, I don't know for the, like, if you're doing a first round playoff, I don't know that, to be honest, if that's necessarily an issue. I will say there is a push to put the benches on opposite sides of the field, especially this past year and because of COVID. But on our turf field, that is, I don't think it could be done because of the way the fence is. Again, it's not a mandatory thing, but it is something that they say that if it can be done, you should do it.
Okay, thanks, Todd. And I guess to Greg and Todd, you know, if you can look at, if there is an option to provide more space there, like Tom said, now's the time probably to look at it. And I agree with the other board members that said that it's time to do this. There, you know, we do have some funds coming in due to COVID, so it's, you know, that we're past our warranty period on the existing surface. And then one question I had, and I'm going to ask, you know, Greg, and I know that you talked with the other coaches about this replacement. I'm asking, you know, is this the appropriate contractor and type of surface or new turf that we should be putting in? You know, is there some history or documentation showing that it's good for, you know, the injury aspect of it?
Mr. Trout, you talked to the companies, and I did not. Do you have any information on that?
They have not stated whether it's anything safer from one company to another. They've always had their stances on turf. There are the pros and cons, no matter how you look at turf versus natural grass. And we've talked about it before. The natural grass is something that we cannot support as far as the amount of events that we have on that our athletic teams use the turf for. And that's not even including the phys ed. So going back to the turf, yeah, they have not indicated as far as anything being technology, as far as the synthetic material, as far as being safer, one safer than the other. They still will, you know, pass the GMAX tests that they use for concussions. So as far as that type of information, some like to use sand, some like to use just all rubber. This is just a plain rubber base, which seemed to be a majority from what I've taught. Well, unless you go to certain companies like to use sand and rubber mix. They've never really indicated their preference as far as, well, never for safety reasons, I should say.
I guess, Greg Trout, why are we choosing, or do we have to bid this out, or are we choosing this contractor? And if so, why are we choosing this contractor? And Todd, I'll get to you. I know you raised your hand, but
It's one that we used in the previous turf. I did get a couple of state contract bids, so they know they do not need to go out to bid. You know, they are a CoStar's vendor, I believe, or whether there's multiple vendors we can use. And Jared, I think, also has an email from them indicating that it is a state contract. The difference from, I'm trying to think of one of the bid that came in just this, like last Friday, I believe. I think it was 30 or 40,000 more than the current one.
Greg, do you have something you wanted to say?
I was Todd Myers. Are you there? And Greg Trout, is this a field turf type I know field turf is a brand name, but I'm asking now, like the type of quote unquote plastic grass. You know, is there? Did they express any difference in the type of actual manufactured turf to you?
Each company has their own preference, of course. They're going to tell you that theirs is the best, no matter what you do. little bit like going car shopping. But there isn't anything that I heard that, was telling me differently. I don't have the list of stadiums that they've been replacing with in our area. But there again, they are also replacing turf in our areas that were put in roughly the same time ours was too.
So it's basically the same, each company has the same product. It's just a different brand, a different name. It's like what I call it field turf, where it's like blades of grass sticking up, and it's not like a flat carpet.
No, even AstroTurf does not use that generation that you remembered seeing at IUP 30 years ago or 25 years ago. Yeah, they no longer, I don't know of anybody still producing that style.
I think, Mr. Kerr, that's what you were getting at. Yeah.
Todd, do you have a question or comment?
Yeah, well, my first question was, and Greg kind of brought it up, was are we aware of other places that have put this in? And I'm just curious from a coaching standpoint, because I have coached at a lot of different stadiums. As far as the question about this kind of ties in a little bit in the safety and the difference between the turfs and whatnot. I agree with Greg. Most of the turfs are the same. Honestly, the difference is what is underneath the turf from my coaching standpoint, and actually from what I've played on as a player. Our field is almost like playing, I mean, I'm exaggerating, of course, but our field is almost like playing on concrete, because it is so old and the rubber has been basically beat down so much. We go to these stadiums that have brand new turf in it, and it's like playing on your living room carpet. I mean, it's unbelievable the difference in it. So from a safety standpoint, it's basically the difference of playing on concrete versus the difference of playing on almost more of a plush carpet. And you fall on the stuff that you fall on our turf, it hurts. I mean, it doesn't have quite the give that the newer stuff have. And again, that's just because of the fact that it has been around for so long and held up for so long. And for what it's worth, if this is the company that's gotten us this far, to me, that's a pretty good testament to the quality of this company.
And thanks, Todd, for those comments, because you do probably have some of the most experience of all these different fields. So you were involved in supporting this brand and this type and the underlayment, and right?
Yes, I was.
Okay.
Yeah, and I have had nothing but good things to say about it since day one.
All right. Anybody else have any comments or questions?
Mr. Kerr, just to summarize, Greg Trout and Mr. Lazanik will work together to meet with the coaches. They're going to do three things. One, they're going to review the design, the schematic that they provided us. They're going to also look at the fence issues and have a conversation about that. We would not increase the length or width of the field. We just may have to make some modifications to the fence. And then thirdly, Greg Lazanik's going to work on getting us a quote for the padding that has been torn and ripped up. And we'll bring that back to your committee next week, sir.
In the benches. The bench location.
Well, by moving the fence, that would be able to take care. Yes, sir.
The other option would be to reduce the width of the soccer field itself. So you could reduce it from 65 to 62.
Yep.
And get more sideline space. It seems like you're really limited on sideline space for the throw-ins and whatnot.
Can I chime in on that?
Yeah.
If I were to make a suggestion, I would leave everything exactly as it is, except for the fence on the scoreboard or the press box side. I would move the fence back, say 3 feet. So then you can put the benches on the blacktop. And that way you have a little bit more, a lot more safety on the sideline. So nothing would change in terms of the turf size. Just move the fence back 3 feet. So then you can put the benches on the blacktop.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Myers. I think that was my whole point. I just think we're not going to make that decision tonight. I think that's why I asked for Greg to work with you and talk to you and get some input, because with the respect of time, Mr. Kerr, that's not our point tonight.
Okay.
Well, we want to move it forward.
Yes.
But we want to move it forward and improve it if we can.
Yep.
Right, I get it.
Okay. What's next? Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep,
Greg.
thanks.
Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, Greg and Greg and Todd.
Todd, thank you.
moving on to the Eisenhower entranceway.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Kerr. I just want to have a conversation with the committee and, you know, we're not going to vote on any proposals or designs this evening. It's our hope and our intention that the firm will come to next week's meeting with some plans and with some layouts. What I'd like to do tonight, though, in absence of those proposals and designs, just have a conversation about the remaining funds. As you can see with the East Pike roof, you know, that cost is going to fluctuate. What I'm asking the committee to do is consider about saying, okay, let's do one project at a time, mark that off our list, but have an agreement that we know East Pike is a priority for us based on the safety audit, based on our conversations. Would it be feasible to have a conversation about allocating remaining funds to get that done? And then once that is in place and we have a good idea where the costs are, then move on to something else. What I'm afraid of happening, Mr. Kerr, is that we're fighting multiple fronts and we may overextend ourselves cost-wise and money-wise and be put in a situation where we have to go back and revisit our decision. So what I'm asking respectfully for this committee is that I entertain the idea of saying, okay, Mike, we're going to do the roof once we decide what that looks like. And we know the cost associated with that. We know we're doing the field, but next on our list should be have serious conversations, ongoing conversations about the East Pike entryway and trying to decide what we want to get out of there. Oh, I'm sorry, Ike, yep, Ike, I'm sorry, I apologize. Yep, Ike, yep, about the Ike entryway and just allocating the rest of the money to the side of it. I'm not saying it all has to go toward that, but I'd like to say, let's now shift our energy towards that and get that done one project at a time. And I'm only saying that, sir, because it falls in line with our safety audit that we did and the priorities that we identified as a committee. But I'll defer to you, sir.
And I agree with you. A couple years ago, we sort of had this discussion and we unofficially, I think, reached some consensus that we would, eat one apple at a time instead of trying to slice up the whole bag and eating them all at once, because it keeps us focused on one thing so we can spend more time having discussion and debate and work through any issues, come up with the best, designs that we can, when we focus on one thing. So, and the only thing maybe, to clarify, and again, we're not allocating all the money to Eisenhower, but we're going to reserve the money for now, not knowing what Eisenhower's project is. Is that saying the same thing, just a little bit different?
Thank you for the clarification, Mr. Kerr. That's how I interpret it. Yes.
Okay. All right. So we can move on, or anybody have any comment?
Yeah, Ms. Barker has her hand up, sir.
Barb, go ahead.
Have the architects got back to us with the last designs they were supposed to present?
They have not. I just heard from them today. They're hoping to have updated designs by Wednesday, which I will then send to the committee. And then we will, they'll be at the Buildings and Grounds Committee next Monday for further discussion.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Barb. And I'd go ahead and send them to the whole board, Jared, just not the committee.
We could send that. Yes, sir. Jared, are you okay with that?
All right. Anything else on number one non-agenda item? If not, we'll move on to number two, the 2021-2022 budget discussion. And I don't know if Madam Vice President's going to take over or Mr. Vukovic.
If it's okay with you, Madam Vice President, I'll walk us through it. Jared and I, and if you have any questions, please, we'll be glad to entertain them.
Yep, please go ahead.
Jared's going to go over section A. I'll go over section B, but Jared just would like to bring forward the budget projection. He did a nice one-page front and back highlight that we provided a copy with you both digitally as well as in your packet for you to look at. And I'll give the floor to Jared to look over that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Randy, could you bring up just the discussion sheet there? Yeah, or it's hyperlinked on there as well.
Oh, it's in here? That's okay.
For those that intended to have your packet with you, it has both yellow highlights and green highlights.
And I know we're kind of getting somewhat limited on time, so
Can you
this is
speak up,
also
Jared?
hyperlinked to our agenda tonight, as well as the typical budget projection that the board is used to seeing is hyperlinked on there. So please feel free to take a look at either one of those documents when you have time. But we also can have further discussion on this at our Audit and Finance Committee meeting in, I guess, 2 weeks from now on April 26th. So just kind of wanting to highlight a little bit. I pretty much have a first draft of next year's budget complete, but what we always like to do is first take a look at where we're estimated to end the current year. So just to briefly kind of highlight some of those areas is for 2021, the current school year, we are looking at final revenues or estimated revenues of just over $55,000, which is almost $1 million. Yes, 55 million.
You do run a tight ship.
That would be extraordinary. So just over $55 million, which is the estimate where we will end, which is just over $1 million more than what we had budgeted for. When we budgeted last year, we were just starting the pandemic. I'm not sure where some of our major revenues were going to hit. So we did kind of budget worst case scenario, hoping to end better, which is what we are doing. So first off, our biggest tax revenue, real estate taxes, appear to be coming in over $470,000 over what we budgeted. And the main reason for that is our collections ended at almost 95%. We were budgeting for 93. So that is good news as a district. We typically budget for 95. So in light of the COVID pandemic, we came in pretty much right where we come in at on a normal year, just slightly under 94.72%. So that's a good thing for the district, which resulted in the additional $470,000 in real estate tax revenue. Our earned income at this point is projected to come in at $100,000 over budget. That was another area that we reduced greatly because of the pandemic and where we were at last spring with unemployment. We had a very strong collections in March, almost 80,000 more than what we collected last year at this time. So I'm hoping that that trend continues for the last really 3-4 months here that we have that'll be attributed to 2021. So that $100,000 over budget may be even more when we get to June and July when we finish those collections. Real estate tax revenue is at this point $50,000 more than we budgeted for as well. And it's still coming in strong. The real estate transactions seem to be going pretty almost as normal in a normal year. So that's another good thing for our district. Delinquent real estate taxes, we're budgeting to come in under budget of 100,000, but that ties directly to the normal real estate tax collections. If they're up, certainly delinquents are going to be down. Interest revenues come in a little bit over. Admissions, which is everything that we collect for sporting events, which we have not allowed a lot of bystanders or to come in and watch our sporting events. So it's come in slightly under. But one of the biggest areas in the budget of revenue that has come in and over is ESSER grants. And those are all the stimulus grants that we are receiving from the federal government this year to pay for different things. When we approved our budget last year, we did not know what was coming in. We knew we were at least getting one, but we have gotten multiple other grants throughout the year, and we are using some of that revenue to cover current costs this year, such as the temporary subs, which was about $411,000 to help pay for the COVID sick days that we were mandated to provide employees. We are using some of that money. So you see a big increase in revenue because we are using those new grants to help pay for that. And with all federal money, you recognize the revenue in the year that you have the expenses. So we're not recognizing all the grant revenue. We're just recognizing the amount that we are applying towards actual expenditures. So, very positive in revenues this year for us. Even if once you take out the ESSER funding, that's one-time funding. And we're still hoping that some of those EIT and real estate transfer taxes will continue their upward trend and will come in even more positive than I have projected here. So great news for the district as a whole. Now expenditures, are coming in under as well for 2021, which helps to offset the budget deficit that we projected. Healthcare is coming in $22,000 under, and I'm not going to go through the whole list for time here tonight. So to summarize kind of where we are right now, I'm projecting we will end 2021 is just slightly 600,000 to the positive. So in a year of the pandemic and a year that we had a budgeted a deficit of just around $2 million, we are looking to come out to the positive, which is a very good thing for us. And that is due to everybody, the board, the decisions we've made over the past year, the administration, the teachers, and the community as well, for everything they've done as far as real estate taxes, continuing to pay those. So some considerations just for the board to start thinking, and we will have further conversations on this. Is
Jerry, can I interrupt?
Last year when we came to.
Can I ask you a quick question before you move on? This charter school tuition is a little worrisome. What do you think is going to happen there? So you're saying it's over budget?
We did have some additional students who enrolled at Cyber Charter School this year. The pandemic, I would guess, played a pretty big role in that, and students not wanting to come into our buildings. We are hoping that some of those kids will return. We also, again, kind of similar to the previous year, have a larger 12th grade class. Not saying all those students will graduate this year. We are hoping the majority of them will. And then we will not be responsible for them next year. So, that's kind of, we're still getting rid of some of those bigger classes that were in place even prior to us starting our cyber school. They just never came back into our cyber school. They were there before we started ours. They are now graduating. We have about one or two more of those classes, and then we see smaller class sizes in outside charter schools, hopefully because of our school and the effects it.
And Madam Vice President, to echo your point, you're spot on. The thing I point out, remember, what you see not only is the most flawed law in Pennsylvania, in my personal opinion. What you also see here is, remember, when it looks at the special needs rates and the cost associated with those type of kids, this could only be an increase of, say, 6 or 7 kids when you look at the average rate for cost of a special needs kid. So in the middle of a pandemic, only going up anywhere from a half dozen to a dozen is quite remarkable, where you see the larger cities, school districts getting crippled over this. Again, I do think this is the most flawed law in Pennsylvania next to the this is, I think, the most flawed law. And I think you hopefully you'll see some change. To what extent, Madam Vice President, I don't know, but it like you, it caught my eye, but I wanted to give some perspective to that number as well.
Julia, there was one other thing I'd like to add to that. Just before I came, in today's mail, there is a state of the education report. Did you see that? If I don't mean to belittle $200,000, but compared to some of the other districts and what their average and the actual impact, according to that report, $200,000 is an outstanding achievement in a way compared to what some of the other districts faced with their increase in charter cyber.
Magazine or pamphlet that's in there is the number of school districts in the state that are planning to raise their taxes, and the fact, the fact that we're looking already, and I know we're early, but this is really positive, good news.
Yeah, this whole sheet is, Jared, thank you. This is a nice job, thank you.
And just like I said, the couple considerations there, similar to what we did last year, is, and we can certainly have these conversations throughout the budget process here, is what do you want to do with any amount that we end up in the positive? Is it something we want to let roll over into future years in the general fund, which increases fund balance, or you have the option, as we did last year, to transfer any, an amount of money to the capital reserve to help build that for future projects, so that, we could do something without necessarily borrowing money. We can pay for it out of capital reserve. We certainly have a list of projects to use that money for. Again, that's something we can have further discussions as we work through the budget process for final approval in June. And even the transfer amount, we can do something similar to we did last year till we wait till the final numbers come out through the audit process to make that decision like we did. I believe we did that in October, 4 months after the budget year closes. So
What's your drop dead date for being able to reserve into the next fiscal year? So we did it in October. Can you go to December?
no, only because our AFR, our annual financial report, is due at the end of October. So that's our deadline to really get the final numbers to PD.
And I'll say too, again, this year that I think that's a good idea, Jared. Just like we talked about, trying to fund the turf right now because there is money. I think when there is a chance to put money toward our buildings, we should take advantage of that.
And
Thank you. And that's nice how you outlined everything here.
Yeah, and I think the prices are going to go up. So the reserve sounds right now, looking at it right now might be a good idea. Any questions on this portion of his report from anybody in TV land out in Zoom? Okay, seeing no hands raised. Jared, you want to finish up?
Yeah, the other part, and we'll certainly, and I'm going to, I'm not even going to cover a whole lot of this tonight because we are going to have further discussion in 2 weeks. But right now, the budget projection for 21-22, which is, the budget we will look to approve in June right now, has a budget deficit of 1.9 million. And that's mainly due to the expenditure increases that you see there, with our revenues pretty much staying flat. We've, in the process, even tonight, we're looking to approve a couple tax assessment appeals with some pretty significant decreases in assessed value, which doesn't bode well for our largest revenue source, our real estate taxes. What we will have some further conversations on, especially on the revenue side, is how we will implement and incorporate the ESSER grants into our budgets over the next couple of years, which could help decrease that 1.9 even for next year. But what I do want to warn the board on as we kind of work through that process, and I have it highlighted there in green, is that as we incorporate some of that ESSER funding in, a lot of it, right now we have about $200,000 or $290,000 incorporated into the budget, even at that 1.9, that covers really year-to-year expenses. So when that ESSER funding goes away, those expenses have to be covered with something. I think using the ESSER funding to help pay for some of the lost revenue we have is certainly what is there meant for, and can help with that budget deficit over the next couple of years. But I know we've been working through this and we do an excellent job of having these conversations. I just want to make sure that's a conversation we have, is when that ESSER funding goes away, we need to be prepared for that. And we will work through that over the next couple of years, because that's how long we do have the ESSER funding available for us. So, and then as always, it's not a conversation we like to have, but if the board is interested at all in having a conversation on raising taxes, I did want to provide you with the different figures as to what a 1% tax increase, 2%, and 3% increase could generate in revenue to the district. Right now for this year, the max as a district we can raise is 3.7. That's our index. I just provided you there again with a 1, 2, 3% increase and what that would do as far as dollars to the district. So.
Thank you, Jared. I think, yeah, I mean, I think we have to have a discussion about where we're going to be on the taxes. The deadline's coming up, but I think unless anybody has an objection, I think we should still move forward with keeping all of your projections based on a 0% tax increase. So we stay consistent with the past years. Does anybody have a problem with that? To maintain that discipline? Okay. Okay. I see it's 6:50. I think we've, so does anybody have any other comments on the finance side? You can kind of, I think it's important to digest these numbers in the next several weeks, because as we get closer to crunch time, we'll see some of this flattening out. So anything else, Jared or Mike?
Madam Vice President, the only other thing we have is under B, ESSER funding breakdown. The academic committee supported this breakdown from last week. We just put it on the agenda again to see if there's any further questions or clarification that was needed from our last week's meeting. If not, you'll be voting on tonight, so we wanted to afford you the opportunity to address any questions or concerns that may have happened since last week.
Okay, does anybody have any questions? We did go over this about ESSER 1, 2, or 3. And there is a vote tonight, yes?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
All right,
As directed from the academic committee. Yes, ma'am.
yeah, okay. I think we've discussed all of this pretty thoroughly. We had a 3.5-hour academic committee meeting the other day, so I think we covered a lot of, I think we made a national record.
Tom did a good job.
Tom, Kate, I'll tell you that Tom's breaking records. Okay.
And the board's not voting, Madam Vice President, on how to spend all of it.
Right.
There's still a lot of discussion. I think there's over almost $2 million that are still not kind of allocated to anything. So plenty of conversation to come.
This was kind of more of a, letting people know where we stand today.
Yes, sir. Yes,
Okay,
sir.
this is a snapshot of the ESSER.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, anybody have any,
Raise your hand.
Barb, did you? Barb raised your hand. Barb, go ahead.
Can you use any of the ESSER funding coming up for any of our building project stuff, like ventilation systems?
Yeah, that's being looked at and considered. We talked about it.
There is some limitation on it, isn't there? Yeah. Well, I think that's going to have to come up at Buildings and Grounds whenever they're ready to answer that, so.
I look forward to hearing it.
Well, yeah, I know. Aren't you excited, Barb? I know.
Well, yeah, from what I understand is Du Bois School, with some of that funding, redid their whole entire ventilation system of all their buildings.
No kidding. Huh.
Definitely not.
Wow, that's interesting. They must have had a lot of money. Yeah. I mean,
Right.
yeah. But, you know, for me, I just want to get this roof, a basic roof done at East Pike, and now we're looking at numbers that are just sort of unsettling, but, okay. Anything else for the good of the order, Terry? I don't know. Okay.
It was a good joint meeting. though.
Yeah, it was. I think we've all learned a lot. It's, yeah. So thank you very much for coming. And I think, yeah, thank you, Randy. You've been running around. I'm sure you're feeling maybe a little bit exhausted. But it's been interesting. I think we're going to work out the kinks. So thank you. And we're going to go now into executive session, correct?
Yes, thank you, Madam Vice President. For the board members who are remotely, I sent you a separate invite. You can log off of this meeting. Please log on to the next one, and we'll be there momentarily. For our guest, if you don't mind stepping out, we'll take you to the yes, sir. We can take you. I'll show you where the library is, sir. We have it open.